Is that this is a workshop. There will be a few slides where we actively seek um, audience participation in that particular part of the exercise, but really this whole deck has guidelines and some templates and such that you can use after the meeting. The slides will be shared through the Founders Bay organization, so you would be able to get them from there. But when it comes to the audience participation time, and of course you can ask questions throughout the course of the presentation, but when it gets to the audience participation part, you can put your answers or your questions in the chat. Okay, so without further ado, my name is Holly Rowland, and I founded Rebel GTM. I've been working as a go-to-market advisor for the past 7 years or so. Previous to that, I had been at PricewaterhouseCoopers, Oracle, SAP, and then a number of different startups that I've worked on are listed here below. I started my career actually as a Big Four startup advisor, meaning that I helped emerging companies to write business plans and develop financial forecasts and find VC funding when I was at PwC. And then from there, I went completely into technology as my career and decided that I would much rather work with startup companies as opposed to larger organizations. So I love to engage with companies on a fractional basis and help them with their go-to-market in the B2B context. And Nick, please introduce yourself.
Great. Thank you, Holly. First off, wonderful to be here. My name is Nick Sarlis, been in the industry for about 25 years, and the majority of that time with startup companies. Many of the logos that you'll see in my profile here, these are companies that have all been acquired or have gone IPO. So I've had the privilege of working with those companies in the early stages, helping them grow through the various stages of growth that every startup company goes through. Made my fair share of mistakes. And in 2021, Holly and I connected, and very much so passionate about what we're doing here at Rebel Go to Market to help the early stage startup companies, which is extremely difficult in those early days to put the proper process, cadence, and discipline in place to ultimately grow the business through the various stages of growth. What was a catalyst for me to make this decision is I've seen a lot of small companies hire very senior people, pay them a lot of money, and provide them a lot of stock options. And it made me realize the companies were probably too early for that type of spend. And it probably better off using a type of company such as Rebel to provide the fractional executive leadership that's required to persevere and build the business through those early stages to get to a point of scale.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Nick. And I'll just close that by saying, in general, we provide both fractional executive resources as well as project-based
Mhm.
teams for startup companies to help them scale really quickly before they're ready to hire full-time people. Okay, so we have worked with a number of different startups, and this is just a high-level list of the companies that we've worked with. Some of them are obviously larger organizations that we've done projects for, while others are smaller ones that we've helped to grow into either the acquisition phase or IPO or just are growing as their own companies independent of an exit so far. We also work with a number of VC firms in the Valley and can often help companies to connect to venture capital. So the topic for today is go-to-market mistakes that we see for that a lot of companies in the early stages do, and we want to provide some guidance on developing a go-to-market plan and how to avoid some of the common mistakes that we've seen other founders do. So the first thing that we wanted to make sure everyone was on the same page about is that go-to-market is very different, has become very different in the past, say, 10 to 15 years, based upon how software is and other B2B type solutions are delivered. Um, and so it used to be that you would just create a technology product and then give it to the customer and some third party to help them with the implementation. And, you sort of would handle support requests or whatever, but you weren't necessarily an integral part of helping that company to use those solutions in a really close relationship day to day. Today, you really need to think of your product being a part of the solution, but it's not the solution. The company is the solution. And what that means is once the tech product is done, you really need, and you've achieved product market fit, you really need to make sure that marketing, sales, success, and the product team are working together, focused around the buyer and working from the same type of activities and go-to-market strategy and operations, so that you can provide the best experience to your customers and hopefully earn the right to do upsell and cross-sell motions later. So this slide just outlines how that cycle operates and how we see it and how we see all of those teams as being integral to the go-to-market motion. I found this research a while back as to why most startups fail. And you can see that the majority of the reasons here are due to ineffective go-to-market strategy and poor execution. So, for example, if the company has determined when it fails that there was no market need, that tells me that there was a lack of research and really understanding the market and really understanding the buyer before a larger effort was made to go into to scale the company. So if you look at all of these different reasons that I've circled here, these all point to reasons that companies fail, and the ones that I've outlined are very much closely tied to go-to-market.
Thank you, Holly. So what we're trying to do as well in this presentation is bring a lot of real world type experience. And this is actually something that came out of a previous company that I was engaged with. These were some of the nuances that we analyzed in order to get the company to where they were, to where they were going. When I had joined that particular company, they were 5 million in revenue. I joined as a fractional leader, experienced quite a bit of churn. ARR went down to 2 million. We did a lot of analysis and really put some solid process cadence and discipline in place, as well as aligning the various go-to-market organizations that included marketing, customer success, and also product. This was just a quick checklist that we did early on. We put the operational prescription in place for each of these organizations in order to decrease the time to sale, create some predictable revenue, put a revenue model in place where that was very much so aligned with the sales stages. So we can drive revenue on a predictable basis and also drive the milestones or the value horizons within the project for each of the customers that we are engaged with. And if you go to the next slide, Holly, I think what's so interesting here is I get on LinkedIn and I read a lot of what's happening. And please forgive me for using this term. There's a lot of talking heads on LinkedIn today providing advice on go-to-market. But the fact of the matter is this is extremely laborious. A very tight prescription for each of these organizations do need to be put in place. And we'll talk a little bit about that later in the presentation. One of the things I also see is that some think that this whole go-to-market and driving revenue and ultimately driving customer success can be automated, and it can't. This is laborious, particularly in the early days. I joined a company, this particular company ended up going IPO. I joined them at 10 million. And I can remember documenting everything we did documenting everything, every execution, every model, every motion that we were executing against in the marketplace against all of the functional orgs. So we always had a baseline of where we were going to grow from. So I highly recommend doing this as you grow your business. The other thing I highly recommend is putting together a very strong OKR, KPI, uh, um, uh, go to market for each of the orgs. And the OKRs are really the objectives and the key results that you hope to achieve. KPIs, in my opinion, is the right activity. And I think we should be measuring this every week. And that type of documentation can be used to grow the organizations and ultimately create a predictable model. What we have here on the right-hand side are just some examples of some of the things that we would put in place by org or functional group that even with companies I'm with today, we review it on our all hands and in our executive meetings. Not every week is there a material change week over week, but when there is, we're able to react very, very quickly.
Great. So what we're going to go through next is several steps to create an actionable GTM plan. And then we will talk in a good deal of depth about identifying and reaching the right customers. To me, this is really the core of the go-to-market plan. And if you don't have this information sorted out, then it's very easy to get off track. We will talk about pricing strategies, especially those focused on AI-based solutions, and the when and how to scale effectively. So the first thing that we wanted to talk about was that you really want to start with identifying what your go-to-market success will look like. And so what we've included here and what we go through with a lot of the founders that we work with is that there are three key areas that you need to think in as specifically as you can about what your objectives are for those particular areas of your company. So the first is growth, which is primarily focused on sales, could also include some degree of customer success because you recognize revenue once your solution is actually deployed at a customer. So if you have an objective to get to $2 million in bookings in the US for this year, then what you want to do is be very specific about the priorities that you feel will help you to support that objective, and then specific measurable goals. So think of the goals as what Nick was referring to as the KPIs that you want to met. Like, I feel like I will be successful if I grow bookings or if I grow my marketing MQL leads by a certain percentage that will get me to the level of revenue that I'm trying to achieve. Your goals could also be something to do with the sales cycle and making the sales cycle more fast and efficient and effective. So the way to think about this for each of the different areas, growth is, like I said, mostly focused on sales, but could also include elements of marketing and customer success. Brand refers primarily to marketing and primarily associated with what you want to do in terms of getting your visibility in the marketplace and establishing more credibility in the marketplace. It doesn't necessarily, in this instance, refer to things like demand generation goals, because that's really kind of part of growth. So this is more about earning credibility in the market or category creation or something of that nature. And then innovation can refer to both product level innovations that you want to do at the platform level or by addressing a new buyer or user of your solution or something of that nature. And can also include things like making the adoption process easier with the customer success team. So these are not, what's good about this mechanism is that it forces shared goals across the organization so that everyone has a stake in growth, everyone has a stake in brand, and everyone has a stake in innovation that is part of the go-to-market team. Go ahead.
Holly, I'll just add your third bullet point down, I think is so spot on. I worked with an organization putting OKRs in place that started with the CEO and it trickled down waterfall effect through each of the functional orgs. We then put KPIs in place, which, as I mentioned earlier, the key activities each of the functional groups and individual contributors should be executing against. Now, I did this with sales first, and then we did it across the rest of the organization. It turned into a science project. It turned into the job was the process of building OKRs and KPIs and not executing against them. So just a quick word of caution, when you put this together for your organization, make sure that it does start at the top, make sure that the OKRs are simple, simplistic, and measurable, and that the KPIs are executed at the individual contributor level, and that you are reviewing them on a weekly basis. The goal is to increase revenue, increase your brand, increase your exposure, and not optimizing on the process of creating OKRs or KPIs.
Yeah, and the other thing I'll mention is one of the clients that Nick and I worked on and are still working with, we gave them this mechanism and sort of proposed an initial cut of it. The founder was a data scientist by background, and he ended up creating like 20 goals, and that's way too many. Just keep in mind that you've got a small team and you need to focus on big goals for the year or for whatever horizon that you're working on, and keep these goals sort of high level but measurable. Don't create 20 because that's just way too many and your team can't keep up with that. All right, I want to move on in the interest of time, but we certainly can answer questions about this a little later if that's something you need to do. Okay, and then before you go into other parts of the go-to-market plan, I will tell you that one of the red flags I hear with founders very often is, I just want demand generation. And that tells me that number one, the founder doesn't necessarily, or the whole team doesn't necessarily really understand the amount of work that needs to go into really understanding your customer at multiple levels before you do any kind of demand generation tactics. And so do invest in the research and planning that is required before demand gen activities to really, really understand your buyer. And I'm going to go through multiple steps to do that. The things to keep in mind in the the B2B context is number one, buyers go through the vast majority of the buyer's journey before they ever decide to talk to you. And so what this points to is that you need to really invest in understanding what your message is, who you're trying to talk to, and what it is that they will value about your company. And so if you can take that time to be prepared, then your go-to-market will be in much better shape. It also means that you need to invest in putting a message out there across multiple channels, and we'll talk about that a little bit later when we get to the demand gen piece. That needs to be consistent and sustained uh, uh, investment that you commit the company to do, because marketing unfortunately just doesn't work in a way that is sort of you can do it for 3 months and then not do it for a year and then do it for 3 months. It just isn't as successful if you do it that way. One of the challenges that I see when it comes to learning more about your buyers is that many companies may have a solution that is horizontal in nature, meaning you could sell it to an insurance company, you could sell it to a consumer packaged goods company, you could sell it to a pharmaceutical company. However, in the early days, a lack of your go-to-market focus on segmentations is a real killer. Again, your organization tends to be smaller, and every buyer really wants you to be speaking the language that they understand about their industry and their company. And so, only the largest companies, only the largest companies out there have the ability to really focus on all the industries or even multiple industries. I had a client, in fact, who when I started working with them, actually had 15 different industries that they were trying to focus on, all of them with very unique language around what they do. And so what I was able to do is help them go through an exercise of really refining their attack surface and understanding surface and understanding where um, um, their opportunities are, and maybe some of these other opportunities in other parts of the target here will come opportunistically, but they really want to focus their efforts where the best opportunities are for them. Things I'll let you know is you should probably think about a lot of venture capitalists, of course, want to understand or want to see momentum with the company. And the best way for you to achieve momentum is by focusing on a few, like 1 to 2 segments at the most early on, and really get depth and a range of experience within those particular segments and use the growth that you achieve there to catapult into other segments later on. But one of the hardest things that founders have to learn how to do is to say no, because that means that they, while an opportunity might look really attractive, it's not going to be in the focus of their company and may suck resources into something, another activity that isn't going to be a value added thing for them over the longer term. If you really get focused on defining who your segments are and why those are the right segments, the outcomes will be that you get your target segments really defined. You will have a much better idea of the ideal company profile, organizational requirements of who you're going to need in sales and marketing and other parts of the organization to effectively serve those customers. And then the strategy for a lot of the other organizations really comes much better defined being having the segmentation worked out. And then once you have identified your segments, and within that you'll have an ideal company profile, then you have to start to think about who your buyer actually is. And there are many, many resources. People who are trying to do this today are lucky because we now have generative AI and deep research that can get you a long way into understanding the buyer. But I want to emphasize that I've seen a lot of founders will have a particular product at a certain stage and feel like they really understand the market, and they will often discount what the buyers are actually looking for or saying to them because they feel like they're invested in their product. And it's understandable that people can have that focus and want their product to be really successful, but it's always good to sort of check in with yourself and making sure that you're really, really listening to what the buyers are telling you, even if it's sort of a criticism or something about your product that really needs to be adjusted. So the persona definitions that you'll get out of this, you'll actually need at least 4 persona definitions. So that your buyer is what we call the champion in a deal. And this is where you'll start. And this buyer is usually sort of a mid-level or sort of senior level manager, but not necessarily an executive at a company. And each of these personas have things that they need to know at a high level about your product that will make them comfortable about making the choice to partner with you. So this is the person that you'll focus on first, but then you need to realize that there's actually an ecosystem of people or stakeholders really over in this deal, and that you have to enable your champion by defining your personas in such a way that they can effectively answer the questions and concerns that people around them may have. And those questions and concerns may come from deal influencers like their peers, operators, meaning the people that will actually be using the system on a day-to-day basis. And then once these people are all convinced or at least in support of the deal, then of course they have to go to the C-suite in order to, again, depending on the size of the solution in terms of cost, they have to go to the C-suite to get buy-in. And so it's important to remember that you can convince the champion, but if they can't get their stakeholders to say yes to this deal, then your deal won't go through. It's as simple as that. So you're not just selling to the champion, you're selling to the whole organization. Um,
I'll make a quick comment on this too,
sure.
Holly.
Mhm.
These buyer personas are absolutely critical for every aspect of your growth as it relates to the messaging you put on your website, your PowerPoint presentations, more importantly, your proposals, how you sell, and ultimately how you forecast, and then the playbook by which you put in place the prescriptive sales playbook and customer success playbook on how you will ultimately go to market. So understanding this is going to be critical. Holly and I go through this with each of our clients. It's a process and a workshop that we go through, and it's interesting to get everybody's feedback that is in the organization. So this is not AI generated. This is not generated by research off the internet. This is based on your experiences. Of course, we can bring some outside experience to build these out in detail, but it's critical that we get your operational experience to build these out.
Yeah, and so what's great about doing personas, and we do very detailed personas, is that many of the questions that you would have that would support demand gen or support even what your product needs to do or what customer success needs to do will really become very clear if you do the personas very well. Okay, so here's a little part of the workshop that I wanted to get started on. I'm going to exit here. So again, so far we've defined segments, we've defined our overall go-to-market plan, we have uh, the ideal customer profile, and now we have personas. So the next thing that should be clear for you is kind of what messages that people need to hear about your solution. And so I purposely picked something fairly pedestrian for us to talk about as a workshop. And typically in messaging, you want to have maybe one to three, one to four key challenges that your product is solving. So I'd love to hear from the audience, like if you were thinking about why this backpack would be valuable, what would be a key challenge that you think you would seek to resolve with the backpack? And you can put your comments in the group chat. Okay, so keep all your stuff in one place. That's a good one. While walking, okay. Quickly grab your personal things in a bag. Prevent theft. Okay, I'll say prevent theft. Actually, that's a solution. So we'll say the risk of losing items stolen, other things, uh, or just lost. Okay, so let's just do those two challenges. And so the solution, and so actually this is why messaging can be challenging because it's sort of the challenge is that, I can't carry all of my things in when I walk between locations. So that's really the challenge. And the solution is keep all of your stuff in one place while walking. And the benefit would be something along the lines of um, uh, I'm trying to present and talk, think at the same time, and that's not working out for me. To keep all your stuff in place while walking, and then it's like the benefit being, you know, have the tools and supplies that you need to be effective at class, at work, whatever, right? Um, so rather than going through all three of these, because I want to make sure that we have enough time, that's the kind of example of what you would do in terms of your product. And so when you look at the sample messaging framework here, this is one I actually did for one of my clients. It's been edited a bit, but you can see we have three challenges. This is what we call a messaging framework. And again, you don't want more than 3 to 4 message pillars. Then a high level statement about what the challenge is. Whoops, excuse me. and then a bit more description, talk about the solution, and then the benefits down below. So the way that you use this, it's sort of like an outline. If I'm going to be talking to someone as an elevator pitch, or I'm going to be talking to someone about my overall solution, or if I'm going to be writing the website, I need to know what key challenges that I'm solving, the key solutions, and the key benefits. The best benefits are always quantifiable to the extent that you can do that. And you want to make your messaging simple and brief so that A, you can remember it, but B, that you get very specific about what the differentiating value that you deliver to a customer is. So feel free to use this as an example. And you can see sometimes it's sort of like, oh, my challenge is really something different than what the solution is, but these obviously should be related. Okay, and then so we've talked about personas, what your messaging framework is, and the way that you convey this information to the market is very important. It's around giving an emotional connection to your buyers. There was an author, an English author, who identified that there are really only 7 types of stories in the world. And stories are very, very important. You'll hear salespeople very often talking about stories that they've had with various clients that they've worked with. And that is because it is something that people can relate to and see themselves as a part of that story or have a stake in that story resolving itself. So think about the types of stories that would be good for your particular organization to tell. And then as you produce different types of content, whether it's the website or data sheets or other types of information that you want to give to your potential buyers, you'll have an idea of what kind of story that you're trying to tell and what kind of story will resonate with your buyers. Okay, so now that we've gone through all of that exercise, now you can actually think about starting on demand gen. We've done our industries, buyer personas, messages, and stories, and we can design campaigns. The thing to keep in mind is that it's really important to invest in delivering a consistent message across multiple channels over an extended period of time. I've seen companies say, well, we're just going to send emails to people asking them if they have an Oracle implementation. And it turned out A, to be absolutely the wrong question, and B, only investing in one kind of channel is not going to give you the market representation, market presence that you really need. You also really need to offer your something that the buyer values, even to the point of giving them an ROI model or a template to work on for them to figure out how to solve a particular problem or something of that nature. And keeping in mind that you're having this consistent investment, you need to recall that your current buyers, let's say you've identified a TAM of what your addressable market is. The buyers in that complete TAM at any one time, only 5% of those buyers per research are in the market at any one time. That means that you also need to keep in mind that the 95% of other people you want to reach still need to hear from you. It takes an average of 15 touches for a buyer to remember you and to start to engage. So make sure to treat this as an ongoing activity. Sometimes you might have to reduce your activities, but try to keep it as ongoing as you possibly can to make it as effective as possible. And if you do earn a meeting with a buyer, I want to restate the point of listening more than you talk. I've seen many founders and their teams go into meetings, sales meetings, and they are so excited to show their product, and they're very passionate about what they do, and they feel like they can solve this company's problems. But you really need to make sure to give the person that gave you the opportunity to have the meeting, you need to really listen and let them talk most of the time, at least initially, so that they can really articulate their problems and feel heard. And then you are much more likely to earn their business because you'll understand what their problems truly are and how to position your product in order to solve that problem. So, and the last thing I'll say in terms of coming all together before I hand it to Nick, all of that research that we talked about, is down here in terms of what you're doing from a demand gen plan, your segments and your strategy, all the IC personas and messaging. And eventually that comes together into a framework that marketing delivers in order to reach all of the internal and external audiences that need to understand what your company does and why it's valuable to work with you. And then the final thing I'll point out is that many of the outcomes of the go-to-market plan go directly to support the sales cycle and making it faster and more effective and more predictable. And that's exactly what you want, especially if you've got investors who are asking you what your plan is and how much money that you're going to be making. So here's a set of activities and documents that Nick and I had put together in order to support one of our clients so that they could understand at what stage of the sales cycle would different types of tools come into play and who is responsible for delivering those tools. You can see that this was definitely an effort that crossed the entire organization.
And I'll mention a couple of things too. Holly talked about not demoing too early, which is so critical, which is why a prescriptive playbook is so important. A playbook that matches your go-to-market, your motions. It's very easy to flip open a laptop and give a demo and demo something or features that might not be of any interest to the prospect. That's why it's important to have prescription and execution, entry criteria and exit criteria by sales stage. You control the messaging, you control what's being delivered, and the outcome will be much better as a result. What you're seeing here, we put this together, shared it with the VC that happened to be interested in funding this particular company. They received the funding because what we were showing was a framework and an execution model for success to scale the organization.
Yep. Okay. So I'll turn this over. Oh, sorry. Well, really quickly. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because it tends to be very, very specific to companies, but pricing has changed quite a bit, especially with the inclusion of AI in those solutions. And so it's much more challenging to determine what the pricing model should be than it was when solutions were less dynamic and less subject to continuous learning as they are today. So here I've listed what the emerging models look like. The issue is that all of these models have potential issues that could rise up that could make the pricing model not workable either for the vendor or for the customer or both. And so it's important to really think through how you're going to balance your ongoing costs, the evolving value of the solution, and unpredictability in terms of what the compute demand should be in order for you to price effectively. We have a lot more depth that we can provide in terms of pricing. I just wanted to give everyone an idea of what's emerging and how things are evolving for different types of solutions.
All right. So, keeping in the theme of the workshop, wanted to get a good sense from everyone on the call, and we can again put it into the chat. Holly, if you don't mind, maybe you can type it up. What are some
Yep.
of the mistakes that are affecting the growth in your organization or your functional group? And I thought it was interesting to put it through the lens of what is the root problem, and then the implications that you're faced as a result. And then I have a slide that I'll share as well on what I'm seeing in the field, call it field level observations.
So the first one was no clear sense of product market fit.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Selling to government agencies. Am I reaching out to the right people? And the one is how do you reach out to buyers in the early stages? Meaning you may not understand them as deeply as you'd like to, or as deeply as you need to eventually. Um, and then strong interest. Actually, we'll do this partner, more partners than customers. Okay, if I didn't get you, my apologies, but we're happy, of course, to set up some time afterwards.
Yeah,
Nick,
this is great feedback on what you're experiencing. If you go to the next slide, I'll share a couple of things that I see. And as I do so, I view the world in the startup world in three phases or three stages. The first stage is the build stage. Second is the scaling of the build. The third is the scale. And let me quickly describe each of them.
sorry, excuse me, go ahead.
The build stage is where you're going and you're taking money from family, friends, some angels. You're building a product, and you've got a couple of founders that are taking the product to market, and you're trying to be as acquire as many customers as possible so you can self-fund. Scaling the build is you have a product, you have pretty good product market fit, you know who you're selling to, and you maybe make one or two key hires, and you're trying to scale what you've already built, and that will get you to about 20 million. And then post 20 million is scaling the build, where still founder led, but you're scaling what you've built, and you're scaling the product, the customers, the revenue, so on and so forth. Here's some of the things that I see. Hiring too quickly. Uh, Hiring too quickly and hiring the wrong persona of person. Those that come from large companies are probably not the best fit for a small startup. Small startups, you have to be able to deal with a high degree of ambiguity, high degree of uncertainty. Maybe not about the success of the company, but just about the day-to-day execution. And this leads to, a lack of morale, deteriorating morale, layoffs, and ultimately not delivering on the revenue commitments. When you find that right persona of person, whether it be in sales or customer success or marketing, you can scale very, very quickly from the build stage to the scaling of the build stage, and they'll be a wonderful partner to you. Not focusing on the right things. That's why I'm a big fan of OKRs and KPIs. OKRs being the objectives and key results that you're looking to achieve. And then the KPIs being what is the right activity to execute against in order to achieve those objectives. And as Holly said, let's not over process it. We don't need 20 of them. We just need to get from month to month, quarter to quarter, and have the gradual growth. This one is very interesting. Assumed revenue predictability before it was actually predictable. Early on, we're tapping our own network, family and friends. Maybe some early investors are bringing us some clients. You're still not at scale mode. You're still founder led. You still need to go out and earn the business by developing prospects, putting the right strategies in place for demand generation and the such. I think being founder led is a critical decision on when you transition to giving up the reins just a little bit. But I was with a company that we took public, and we were founder led up until 25 million, meaning the founder was in the majority of sales meetings, despite the fact that we had a large army of salespeople. Why? Because the founder knows the product better than anybody. That founder can help train and enable in real time the sales team and the customer success team, uh, not only to close the deal that we're engaged in, but also to prospect as well. So I think this whole concept of founder led is something that we should all really take to heart and identify when we start to ease up the reins a little bit. But from a high level, these are some observations from the trenches that I've seen, that I experience, and many of the companies that Holly and I go into. We actually, one of the sayings that we have is we need to start going slow so we can go fast. And ultimately, that's why sports cars have brakes, so they can go fast. Holly, I'll turn it back to you.
Actually, it's still you.
Oh, it's still me? Oh, so I kind of talked about this, scaling the build, and these three phases of organizations. Uh, you got the build, scale the build, and then the scale. Um, Zero ARR is still proof of concept. I think this is when you're trying to do a lot of proof of concepts, a lot of pilots. You're building the market. You're also learning a lot. This is where the documentation comes into place. You're learning how your messaging is being received. You're also learning a lot from the prospects. A lot of founders do a wonderful job being very, very curious, and they capture that intelligence from each of their prospects and each of the persons that they interview, whether they're interviewing for employees or they're interviewing VCs. When you're in that $3 million range, you're starting to scale just a little bit. You're scaling your build, you're acquiring customers, revenue is becoming somewhat predictable, but maybe not as predictable as you would like. This is the time where maybe you're bringing on some employees, but let's face it, employees are very expensive. This is where the fractional executives really start to shine, bringing that experience, their successes and their failures to your organization to help you build to this last stage, which is the scale stage. You might have some VPs, might have some individual contributors that you've promoted. This is where the hiring is absolutely critical. Hiring the wrong person or the wrong persona at this stage could really bring you back and put you back into this second stage of just trying to scale the build. So this is something that Holly and I do as well. We do a complete review of hiring personas and if this person is a right fit for your organization. That's a cultural fit and also a skill set fit. Hiring at this stage, it's tough, really hard. And it's also very expensive. If you use a recruiter, that's a very expensive way to go. But if you could tap your own network, find people that are lookalikes, meaning maybe in other companies, other size of companies, other routes to market that you're pursuing, those might be the right people to fit into your org. One word of caution here is you really want somebody on their second or their third marriage, so to say, meaning they've been through it, they've had their successes and their failures, and they're bringing that intelligence and that wisdom to your organization at this particular stage of growth. The last thing I'll mention as well is the alignment of your functional groups is so critically important. I'll just focus on sales quickly for the sake of time. I think sales, customer success, and marketing should be a cohesive, collaborative team that are constantly working together and sharing successes, failures, and learnings from the marketplace. Collaboration, I'm finding, is harder and harder. And I don't know exactly why. There's some cultural shift happening in the marketplace around employee base. But I think this is going to be critical. So when you do bring people into the organization, make sure that they work well together and that they're open to new ideas and have a true growth mindset. But also, the second truth is they have a bias towards execution because you got to drive that revenue in a prescriptive way and retain those customers.